Hello everybody, welcome back. So today I'll be working on my 1979 Kawasaki KZ750 Twin. The work we're going to do today is I'm going to adjust the clutch cable. I finished rebuilding this bike after a year and a half. According to the odometer, the trip meter says 382, so that means I've put 1,382 miles on it. In that time, I've been adjusting things, tightening things, and the clutch plates are original from when I bought the bike a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago. It's got a brand new clutch cable though. And I adjusted it when I first started riding. It was really good, but it's stretched a little bit now and I need to adjust it so it works properly. So that's going to be today's project. Then I've got some other stuff coming up. For example, the tail light here. This is just a cheap aftermarket eBay LED light. I like the style of it, but unfortunately the brake light portion has stopped working. So we'll dig into that. I'm also considering sliding the mufflers a little further back. As you can see, there's some space between. I didn't want to block originally the rear axle so I could remove it easily if I ever need to. But the more I'm riding the bike and kind of getting a feel for it, I think I want to move those back just another couple of inches, just to see. I think it would look cooler. And also I would really like to drop the headlight just a little bit more, not a whole lot. I don't want a ton of gap right here. A little bit more would be fine though. I think the bike would look cooler with it a little bit lower, a little less dorky. Alright, so let me get my tools together and we'll get started. So just hang on, I'll be right back. Alright, on to the clutch adjustment. First step is there's a lock nut and an adjuster right here that I need to close all the way to give the cable as much slack as possible. I just put this piece of rubber hose on here because when I turn the steering wheel, or the handlebars I should say, the cable moves through, up and down through this guide, and eventually it'll wear the guide down possibly, or just mess it all up, or mess up the adjustment. So it's just a little quick kind of fix to keep that protected. I'm going to cut that off. I can just slide that down and pop it off. And now you can see that's the adjuster right there. So, oh, you're dropped down a little bit. Let me see if I can reposition you. I think that's better. So, all that gap has to be closed up and it'll give it a lot of slack. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Now, when you adjust your clutch, there's definitely the method how to do it in the book, but then you can also fine tune it a little bit at the push rod location. I'll show that to you later, and a little bit up at the handle, clutch lever. So you can set it up where it engages later into the throw. You can also do it where it's closer to the handlebar. It's a little bit of a matter of taste, a little bit of a matter of making sure it functions properly. Okay, so now that that is adjusted, next step, come up here to the handlebars. So this is the adjusting lever. This is part of what I was talking about. We'll I'll show you again as I'm finishing. But basically, this knurled piece is considered a lock nut. You loosen that up, and you're supposed to turn this out till you get about 5 or 6 millimeters of play. I would say right about there. Okay. Next step, I have to come down here. This is where the actual clutch adjustment is. I have to take that cover off, and we'll see a lock nut and a screw there. So basically what happens is, when you pull in that lever, it pulls the cable inside of there. In here, there is a round, I don't know, let's call it a gear with a lever on it. When you pull the cable goes that way. It turns that gear, that pushes into the clutch a rod. That rod disengages the clutch plates, and then as you let go of the clutch lever, they re-engage, and the clutch starts spinning, and power is transferred to the rear wheel. So you need to adjust in here how close that push rod is to the clutch plate, and how soon it will push and how far it will push. So that's what we're adjusting now. So let me put you down, and I've got most of my tools ready here. If you notice, almost all of the case covers are Allen heads. I replaced all of these were all, believe it or not, they look like Phillips heads screws, but they're actually called Japanese Imperial Standard. They look like Phillips, but if you have ever bought an old Japanese motorcycle and all of the Phillips head looking fasteners are stripped, it's because the person who worked on it likely did not have a JIS or a Japanese Imperial Standard tip, and they just have a different, basically a different angle. They look like Phillips, but they're set up, the angle of the blade is different. So Phillips will cam out on it and kind of chew it up, whereas the JIS one will grab it well and give you a real positive feel. So that covers off. There's no gasket here or anything because it's just metal on. It's not sealing any oil or anything. Sometimes I like to put a gasket in there. I can see that there should be one, but I don't have one. I do have some gasket material, so I may just cut one at some point and put it in there. So now, if you can see, let me bring you in a little bit. So right here this is a lock nut on the outside of this right here, and there's the screw head. So I basically have to loosen that lock nut, then I turn that screw head in. First I'll back it out a little, and then I'll screw it in until it gets hard to turn, and then I know it's making contact on the pressure plate on the other side. This pushes on that push rod I mentioned. Then I'll back this out about a half a turn, and that should be the optimum adjustment. Now I mentioned earlier you can adjust it to suit your tastes. You can actually, instead of backing this back out a half a turn, you can back it out a little bit less, a little bit more. That's going to change exactly when and how much that push rod engages. I've found too that sometimes I've done this and then I've had to redo it a couple of times because I'm not getting quite the feel that I want out of it. All right, so let me go ahead, make that, loosen that lock nut. Maybe I'll zoom in a little so you can see better. You can hear my zoom, huh? Do you feel like you're part of the process? I don't remember what size that nut is. I think it's a 12. I believe it is. So I'm going to hold that screw head and I loosen that lock nut. It's not super tight on there, but it's just enough. Alright, so now I'm going to back that out a bit and turn it in. I'm just feeling it now getting tight. If I pull it in more, it's now already pushing in. I'm sorry, if I turn it in more, it's already now pushing in on that pressure plate. I don't want that. I want it to just touch it. So I'm backing it out, screwing it in. It's just getting hard to turn now. So you see this is kind of straight up and down. If I turn it that's a half a turn right there. Now I'm going to tighten that nut back down, and without turning the screwdriver, I need to tighten that lock nut. Alright, now according to the manual, that is set. I mentioned the manual. I see a lot of guys on the internet just getting into working on their motorcycles. Here, let me zoom out a little. And, you know, I'm on the various, here, let me grace you with my presence. So a lot of guys I see on the internet, getting on these forums, Facebook pages, etc., asking all sorts of questions about their new hobby, about motorcycles. How do I fix this? How do I fix that? And more often than not, they're asking tolerances. What are my valve clearances? What should be the slack on the clutch cable? What's my tire pressure? What size tires does my bike take? What type of chain does my bike take? What type of oil? How much oil does it take? Etc. My first question is always, do you have a manual? And I'm so surprised how many times people say, no, I don't. I'm just winging it, or they think this knowledge is somehow magically bestowed on you once you bought the bike, maybe through osmosis. Sorry, my filming stopped. So anyway, my point is, get a manual. I got this one. The seller of the bike had it. It came with my bike. But most of the time, you can find manuals for free online in PDF format. If you're in a forum, somebody's bound to have an electronic copy of it. I also found an electronic copy not only of the service manual, but of all the parts diagrams, etc. So when I need parts, I know what to order. I have the part numbers. I can look them up on eBay or at the dealer or wherever. And so just get yourself a manual. You're doing yourself a favor. I always buy these and I read them for fun. They're interesting. If you're into bikes and you want to learn mechanics, it's interesting to read the manual. Or for my Royal Enfield, for example, the manual is only in PDF format. So I've downloaded it, but now I'm going to go to a local print shop and I'll print it out and have them bind it for me. It's going to cost me, with the coupon I have, about 55 bucks. But then I'll have a hard copy in the garage that I can flip the pages while I'm working on the bike, rather than worrying about getting my iPad or my laptop all greasy and dirty. So you may be into that, that's fine. I always love having a paper manual. So now for today's project, for example, here, adjustment, clutch. So everything we did is laid out so far. 1, screw in the lock nut and adjusting nut at the center of the clutch cable to get the cable plenty of play. Loosen the knurled lock nut at the clutch lever, 5 to 6 millimeter gap. Loosen the lock nut, turn the adjusting screw until it gets just hard to turn, etc. It's all there. You don't have to guess. You know exactly what's going on. Alright, let's get back to it. I did another rookie mistake again. I went through everything and I was covering the microphone. I promised myself I wouldn't do that anymore, so I'm reshooting everything. So our last step was we adjusted the pressure there on the push rod. Now, because we gave this as much slack as possible, you see it's together, this has a ton of slack, right? So the next step is, according to the manual, adjust this until all of that slack is taken up. So I'm going to start by showing you I'm turning this counterclockwise, so you see how it's creating more of a gap, right? That's going to tighten this. Now I'm going to keep doing that. You keep an eye on that gap right there. You'll see it's going to get tighter and smaller, and I want to turn that knob counterclockwise, or that nut, until there's no free play there. So I'm turning. Sometimes I'll jiggle it a little just to make sure nothing's binding. I'm turning. Can you see it closing? See there? Now, there's still space there, but there's no more free play. I'm going to engage it a couple times, and now there's a little bit of free play again. Not the up and down, but the in and out. I don't know if you can pick that up, but it's ever so slight. So just a little smidge of a turn still. And I'll check it. Yeah, so that's good. There's no free play. Alright, so now that there's no more free play here, meaning that when I push this lever, I'm just tapping it. This cable is not moving at all because it's snug. The next step now is I take this lock nut and I bring it up, and I'm going to snug it up against there so it locks that into place, so that can't spin anymore, so it won't change that it took up the slack at the cable, at the lever. Alright, so I did that by hand. I got to grab my wrenches. Let me put you down. Can you see? If you can't see, you just tell me. Alright, so now I'm going to hold on to the top one so that doesn't turn anymore, and I'm snugging down the bottom one against it, and that will lock that into place. Got it? Any questions? No? Okay. Last step, final step, according to the manual. Now that all the free play was taken up here at the lever, right? Now I have to loosen this knurled lock nut and turn this in so that I get 2 to 3 millimeters of free play here. So this is your fine adjustment, right? This, I mentioned there are a couple different ways that you can adjust the feel of your clutch lever. The first one was how tightly that push rod was pushed in or not. That takes some experience to play with, but it's totally doable by everybody. And then the next one is here. You're going to adjust this free play so that you can kind of get a better feel for exactly when and where and how much you have to pull that lever to engage the clutch. So a big point here too is this end of the lever of the cable sits inside of this, but sometimes it can pull out, so you got to make sure it's in there. Okay, so I'm loosening that knurled nut. That doesn't do anything to this, but now as I turn that adjusting knob in, I'm gonna start getting some free play. Now that's way too much, right? So I'm gonna turn it back out. That's not quite enough, but I always like to engage it. That's still too much. You see it kind of changes. That's about 2 to 3 millimeters, and maybe not quite enough right there. Can you see that? This, I'm looking at that, and it should move only 2 to 3 millimeters. Before I put any serious pressure on it. I'm happy with that right there. So now I'm going to tighten down that knurled lock nut without turning that. So I'm going to put my finger on that to keep it from moving. I'm happy with that. And now you can see when I pull that lever, watch that turn. It's slight. And that's why you have to be precise with that adjustment of the push rod, because it's a really small movement. Basically, as that's turning, it's turning in. It's like a screw. So when you pull the clutch lever, that turns in, pushing the push rod in, and then when you let go, it comes back out, pulling, letting the push rod come back out. The spring pressure from the clutch plates pushes it. So, according to the manual, my clutch is adjusted. Now, a lot of times what I'll do is, like, I'll ride this tomorrow to work, for example. Boo, work, boo. It's okay, pays the bills. I love my job, actually. And I may fiddle with that just a little bit when I'm on the road because I want a little more or a little less pull at the lever. All right? So that is a fine adjustment. But if you adjust that properly, and you adjust that properly, you can get all the adjustment you need right there. All right? Last step, final step, is to put that cover back on. Let's see if I can get you closer. Oh, that's the next to last step. I'll put that cover on. The final step would be to replace that little rubber cover I have that I put on there. But you don't need to see all that. Okay, let me just put this cover back on. One thing I like to do, make sure it's clean and there's nothing, remember the word schmutz? There's no schmutz. So that fits in. Again, when I have some free time, I'm going to make a little gasket for that, just so it's not metal against metal. It's really not a huge deal, but I might as well be kind to my bike. So I'm a bit of an animist. I believe inanimate objects have spirits, have personalities. So I feel if I take care of my bike and I treat it well, it will treat me well. So I'm just going to snug these up. You don't have to kill it. And you have to remember too, working on these bikes, like this bike is 40 years old, right? So you got to be a little careful. A lot of times the threads can get chewed. You don't know what the previous owner did. I mentioned in one of my last videos about feel. So I'm kind of just feeling. It's snug. I'm not killing it. You know, and you just got to be conscious of all your fasteners and how they feel when they're going into the bike. And if they feel crunchy or smooth or what have you. And act accordingly. Don't just blindly throw things in and expect it to be fine. All right? So, on that note, I believe we're done for today. I can't check the clutch plate right now. It's late. I don't want to wake up my neighbors. That would require starting the bike and riding it. I hate when people are like this. So, right? Am I right or wrong? So, here I am. So anyway, I will start this tomorrow. If I have a chance before work, I will videotape that. If not, I'll let you know how it went on another video. And on that note, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions. And if you'd be so kind, feel free to like and subscribe. I hate saying that stuff. I feel like I'm an influencer. I'd much rather be a sinfluencer myself. So, okay folks, thank you. Have a good night, and I will talk to you another time. Bye-bye. Bye. Say good night, Gracie.